Thank you for inviting me to speak. I want to share with you some work that we've done out of the University of British Columbia on rare life-threatening emergencies. So there's a couple of things I want to mention as disclosures. I own something called the Airway app, and it's free, freely available on desktop, Google, Apple. It cost me $10,000 of my own money to create it and maintain it for the last 2.5 years. And it has been the best $10,000 I've ever spent, except for my wedding. Photos are used here with patient permission. And I just want to put up an immediate thank you slide. This has been a labor of love for many, many people involved in it. And in particular, I want to shout out to Shannon Lockhart, my senior resident who's now preparing for her Royal College exams. And she could not be here today. I talked to her this morning. She was having something called FOMO, which was new to me. And she explained what it was. And so I would encourage you to do multi-generational collaboration. Should you ever want to get a project done, young people get shit done, and that's what she did. So this is actually where I used to work. In the late 1990s, I was a pediatric emergency physician at the Hospital for Sick Children in Toronto. My training to be a consultant there was excellent. I was at Dalhousie University. I spent a full year doing pediatric intensive care, followed by 6 months of pediatric anesthesia as part of a 4-year program. I couldn't have hoped for better training. And I got to sick kids, and I dealt with some very difficult airways. And it was very scary to me. Now, the airway itself was not difficult. And the physiology of the children I dealt with was not difficult, and their families weren't difficult. The difficult part was having anesthesia come down and shit all over me about managing an airway in the first place. It was very unsettling to me. And they would come down as a general rule, not all the time, but with the surgical gown going off behind them, and it was almost like Darth Vader entering the trauma room. There was no such thing as the teamwork Chris Hicks talked about yesterday. I didn't feel like a greeter, I just felt terrified. And it didn't necessarily affect the care of that patient, but it sure affected the care of the next patient and the patient after and the patient after. And I was not alone. Most staff people there had that experience. At the time, we weren't allowed to use paralysis agents, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that this is one of my favorite quotes, and I think it epitomizes the spirit of SMAC in that people forget what you said and what you did, but they never forget how you made them feel. So I decided to go and do an anesthesia residency as a second residency. And to this day, I'm so glad that a neurosurgeon didn't publicly humiliate me. So 2 weeks into my anesthesia residency, I had my first can't intubate, can't oxygenate situation. I kid you not. I was working with an amazing staff person. He pushed paralysis in an elective patient, and suddenly we were there. I think I was the calmest person in the room because it was the only thing I'd read about before starting residency. I just assumed they talked about it so much that it happened on a fairly regular basis. And I said to him, what can I do to help? And he said, just write the vital signs, right? So now 5 anesthesiologists are here with 2 surgeons. They're dealing with the patient. I'm over here writing the vital signs. SATs 51, heart rate now 60, used to be 100. And I was the calmest person in the room, having no contextual understanding. 45 minutes it took to intubate him with a 5.5 tube through a classic LMA, and he had severe brain damage. Fast forward 15 years, I'm now a consultant at the same hospital, and this is Jen, one of our amazing intensive care trainees, fellows. And this is now her 3rd attempt at intubation. She's done 2 attempts at DL, changing the blade between those 2 attempts, use of a bougie. Now we're on to VL. This is a trauma patient with a severe head injury. SATs are 89, and I say to Jen, if this doesn't work, what do you want to do? Harder and harder and harder to bag between attempts. And I said, which surgical airway plan do you want? And so she rhymed off all the surgical airway plans, right? Well, I could do a cannula, I could do a scalpel, I could do a Melker wire-guided technique, very correctly. And I said to her, well, which one do you want to do? And she said, well, I want to do the one that works. She didn't say, I want to do the one that looks like a central line, or I'm more comfortable with that. She said, I just want to do the one that works. So would you humor me, please? Can everybody stand up? If you had a surgical airway that had a 50% success rate and that's acceptable to you, please sit down. How about a 70% first pass success rate for a surgical airway? Because I think first pass success rate is something that is a language that we need to include for a surgical airway, just like we do endotracheal intubation. What if you had an 80% first pass success rate? Would that be acceptable to you? Life is not perfect, people. I'm not going to give you 100%. How about 90% success rate? All right. You really want a high success rate because your first shot may be your best shot and indeed your only shot. Now, we do have information. The London Air Ambulance System over 20 years had 42 emergency surgical airways in 7,000 patients. In Denmark, they collect all information from all patients undergoing an operation, and they had 27 over a 6-year period. NAP4 in the UK, arguably truly the most respected and great study on airway management, had 29 surgical airways prospectively in ICU, emerge, and anesthesia over a 1-year period. Mixed bag of results here. And for every one paper that comes out with real patient information, over 30 papers are published with opinion, with argument, with guidelines, and other things not based on patient information. And I just want to highlight the bougie-assisted crike done through the St. Mike's group, including Chris Hicks and Sarah Gray. And I think that this is a good addition to the literature, just out very recently. So lots and lots and lots of opinion, but not a lot of patient experience. This is a paper that's going to be coming out in the Canadian Journal of Anesthesia in a couple of weeks, and a shout out to Stu Marshall, who's right there, who's been my co-author, amazing human factors resource on the MacGyver bias, which is we love to invent things, usually with at least one 3-way tap attached to it. And we say, well, you can use this in the event of a can't intubate, can't oxygenate situation. There's no evidence that it works, but it may work. And so I think that we have a bias of being attracted to homemade solutions. But this is us. You're there. You have no idea which direction to go in to have the highest first pass success rate. And I think it's actually a cruel game, particularly with that. As you start to realize that actually putting together those 3-way taps isn't as easy in that situation with the patient turning blue, and it's a cruel game. So every year, even though you may feel alone as you're trying to sort out what to do, every year, hundreds, if not thousands, of these procedures are done. What if we could capture that? What if we could know what works, what doesn't, and why by the people on the ground that are doing this? And this is the crack in publication right now. If you did a cricothyrotomy according to guidelines and it worked for you, even if you took the time to write it up and submit it to a journal, they would say, thank you very much, but so what? You did something according to a guideline and it worked. Isn't that the way that it's supposed to do? And yet, that is a nugget of information, that is gold, that we can learn from. And if we don't, all of those experiences go away. And we lose the citizen scientist, the person on the ground that knows exactly what worked and what didn't and why. And that's so important. And we are left with opinion. So This is actually one of my most favorite quotes. We've gone as far as we can with traditional research. We now have the technology in our pockets to let us go even further. We released our Airway app at SmackDub in order to start capturing people's experiences with cricothyrotomy in any emergency, but generally in the can't intubate, can't oxygenate situation. Some of the things about it, it's anonymous. You can write things down, and you don't have to, and please don't give any identifying information. And therefore, it relies on your honesty. Now, as a healthcare provider, I'm a trust but confirm kind of girl, and I think we all are. So it took a certain leap of faith that people would be honest. We had some internal consistency questions in it. But as a general rule, the proportion of success rate, as we've done this over the last 2.5 years, has not changed for each technique, and I'm going to share it with you from the data that I actually just analyzed this morning. So people, I think, are generally honest, actually, even in anonymous data gathering. There's some ethical issues about gathering this data, and I just want to direct you. Anesthesia is offering this, our first publication based on this from 2018, for free for today to coincide with this talk. Here we are. We have 100, and feel free to take a picture of this. I'm very happy for you to do so. We have 148 CICO reports now. These are 95% confidence intervals that I've given you, and I've proportionalized the pictures of the different techniques: bougie scalpel, open cricothyrotomy, needle cricothyrotomy, and wire technique to the number of cases proportionally. And the confidence intervals, the wideness or narrowness, reflects the number of cases. And I think that the first thing we need to do is throw away our wire-guided techniques. There is no question that based on the information we've gathered now from 28 different countries, they kink. They kink during these situations. Another thing that we found, I thought this was actually my smartest slide, truly. The supraglottic device is only used 50% of the time. And that is a missed opportunity for us as a bridge, get it? A bridge to oxygenation. I go. Even if you do the right thing, 20% of patients will die. That's really tough. These patients are really quite ill. And did you make the decision too late? Perhaps. But these are very, very difficult clinical situations. And isn't it nice to know that maybe you're not the only one whose patient died? The narratives were compelling. We left it blank for people to talk about. I made this happen. In anesthesia, you push that paralysis and you can make this happen. It, I think, leads us to be a bit paralyzed with our decision. False passage patient died. I transected the trachea, and that paramedic in South Africa that reported this, he's not the only one. Actually, we have it 3 different cases across the world. In the elderly, frail female, when you do a horizontal incision, you may transect their trachea. That's an important thing to know about. Done by the most qualified person in the room. 20% of the time this is reported to us. I was so angry. And it happened 9 years ago. It's still with me. And finally, and this was our last commentary that was just recorded last week, take a workshop and practice this. It was empowering to have done so weeks before this actually happened. Make it easy to do the right thing is what Martin Bromley told us at TASMAC. I think let's start taking away equipment that does not have a proven track record and start to get simple around this procedure and life-saving. Mary Oliver just died, but she is my most favorite poet. Instructions for living a life. Pay attention, be astonished, and tell us about it. Thank you.